Well, good evening, all. I'm grateful to Kevin for giving me the invitation to come and speak with you this evening. And I was first concerned because it's a Friday night, you know what traffic can be like, and I was worried that I'd hit a lot of traffic getting here. But fortunately, there wasn't much traffic on the stairs as I walked down from next door. Of course, I understand you've been talking about the Ten Commandments, going through the one by one, and we're up to the third commandment, which I was asked to speak with you about tonight, and I'm happy to do so. And when I teach the Ten Commandments with our fifth graders, as I do, in fact, I'm in the middle of doing that now when I teach them every Monday, we're right up at the same point, I think, here now. We're just at the third commandment with them. The first thing I always like to remind them when I do the commandments is I tell them, of course, we're going through the history of the Old Testament, and we've just gotten past the point where Moses brought the Israelites through the Red Sea, and they rejoice, and now God brings them to the mountain. And so I said, now that they've been freed from their slavery in Egypt, God brings them up to the holy mountain, and Moses goes up the mountain, leaves the people in the plains, and up there he delivers to them the 10 suggestions. And they look at me and say, no. I said, oh, well, the 10 guidelines? No. The 10 good ideas? No. The 10 recommendations? The 10 helpful hints? No. I said, the 10 what? And they yell, commandments. I said, louder, I didn't hear you. The 10 what? Commandments. Louder, the 10... Commandments. Louder, the 10 commandments. Good, and they get that. They have a lot of fun with it. And I always remind them, I said, if you have a commandment, do you have any option as to whether or not you wish to follow this? And they all know very well, no. It's like if your mother says, I command you to clean your room before you have dinner, you don't have the option to say, well, I'll wait till later. Or, oh, I won't do it. I'll just get my sister. I'll bribe her to do it for me. No, you must do it. And God, unfortunately, many people today kind of see these as merely suggestions that God makes to us. And we give ourselves all these reasons why it's okay for us to ignore these certain commandments. And the Lord says, no, he commands them of us. You will do this and you will not do that. If you do, there will be consequences for it. Not because God's being mean, not because he's trying to control us, but precisely because he's trying to keep us free, to help us be the people that we are meant to be. Beforehand, they were slaves in Egypt. Now they are a free nation. And now to live as a nation, he says, this is the foundation upon which you need to build. You cannot do these things, and you must do these things if you wish to be a nation. So the commandments are the foundation for everyone, and still the foundation for us as Catholic Christians. It's not the sum total of everything. I remember once somebody saying to me, I'm a very good Catholic. I obey all the 10 commandments. I said, well, that's great. I'm glad you obey all the 10 commandments. We're supposed to do that. But God gave the commandments through Moses. A good Jew obeys the 10 commandments. What's the difference between a good Jew and a good Christian? Especially a Catholic Christian. Did Jesus have nothing to add then? If Moses told us on the mountain everything we need, why do we need Jesus? No, the 10 Commandments are the foundation. And then Jesus builds upon all of that to help us grow in perfection in him. Because he wants nothing less than to call us into union with him. To go to heaven. Sometimes we think of going to heaven as this big party, and St. Peter is standing there like a bouncer, and he's got our resume in front of us with all of our good deeds and bad deeds, and as long as we have more checks than minuses, we can go in, but if we have too many minuses, down you go. Well, actually, to go to heaven means to be formed in the image and likeness of Christ, to become perfectly one with God. And that's what he wants to do with us. He's trying to form us into his image and likeness so that we can share his freedom. And we discover then that that following God's law, we're not subjected to his law, but sharing in his freedom. We're allowing God to give us his mastery. Just like somebody who teaches someone to play golf, for example. When you go to somebody to learn to play golf, ultimately when you become a virtuoso golf player, if you will, a master at the game, you're free to play it. There are rules. You know very well, in order to enjoy the game, there's discipline. You have to hold the club a certain way. You can't do this, you must do that. But in doing so, once you've learned the game, you're really enjoying it. Or watch somebody who's a virtuoso piano player. I watch people like my favorite pop group was ABBA, and watching Benny Anderson, the keyboard player. I mean, he would play all over the piano, not even looking at the keyboard. He's bouncing around and enjoying it, whereas when I play the piano, I have to look at the music and every single note and make sure I'm playing it properly. And I'm only starting to enjoy it when now I'm not glued to the page, but I can actually start playing it freely. And that's the same thing that happens to us in our moral lives. When we are so morally bound to the Lord that it comes naturally to us to act the way the Lord is and wants us to do, that's when we grow in freedom. We're truly free when we embrace the Lord's will and his call to us. So he says, do things as I tell you, and I will set you free. I'll give you a freedom the world can't understand. But the beginning steps, like anything, become rigorous. Like learning to play the piano in the beginning, you have to go through your scales and all the other stuff. And sometimes it can be boring, but you have to do it in order to get to the upper levels. And the commandments are that foundational level to bring us to the point where we can grow in holiness in Christ and have the freedom that only he can bring us. So you've been through the first commandment. Number 1, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, all your strength. You worship no false gods. In other words, God comes first. Nothing takes the place of God. Number 2, you don't take his name in vain. And we don't use foul language. God's name should not be used as a curse word. As St. Paul says, with foul language, your holiness forbids it. 3, the last of the 3 commandments that refers to God is what we're talking about this evening. Remember the Lord's day to keep it holy. Now, there's several different ways that we end up doing that. Right away, the first thing that God tells us that we know as Catholics, remembering the Lord's day to keep it holy, means to worship him, to make it a day set aside for God. It's as if to think of the 7 days of the week, there are 6 days that belong to Caesar and 1 day that belongs to God. All the things that we do the other 6 days of the week, well, we take 1 day to stop from all that and remember what it's all about, why we come here, why we have life after all, what we're doing. And we're here to worship God, to remain close to him and bring up our children, if we are married and have children, and those around us, to bring them to Christ in our families, our church family, our individual families, to bring us all into union with God. And so, again, the Lord doesn't say that the first or the third commandment, remember the Lord's day, try to keep it holy. No, he says, remember to keep the Lord's day holy. And the first thing we as Catholic Christians do is we go to Mass every Sunday. Not most Sundays, not whenever there's nothing else going on, not, unless I wake up too tired in the morning. Some people say, I was just too beat. Well, I had a bad night. I didn't sleep well, so they give themselves an excuse. Well, you know what? Jesus, the night before he died, he had a really bad night. Okay, he had been arrested in the garden. He had already been mistreated, abused, and slapped across the face, and was sitting in a pit, waiting for judgment the next day. Well, he could have gotten up and said, I didn't sleep very well last night. Let me come back another day to be crucified for you. No, he did what he had to do, whether or not he had a good day or a bad day. So first, we worship God. And we don't give ourselves excuses to get around it, which sadly many people do. Now, we live in a world where, right after the Second World War, 75% of Catholics came to church faithfully every Sunday. There have always been a few who have excused themselves for whatever their reason. They decided they didn't have to do it. Even St. Paul was always talking about that. Paul was talking about no one should excuse themselves from the community, as some have done. So it's always been part of the faith, but it was always a smaller number. Only in our own time, this is the first time in history where the numbers have reversed, and now 75% of Catholics excuse themselves from Sunday Mass. Whatever their reason, they decide, I don't have to go to church on Sunday. That third commandment doesn't apply to me. And of course the answer is, yes, it does. We need to worship God. Not because God needs us to worship him, but he knows we need to worship him. We need to spend that time with him in prayer and grow close to him. And some people will say, well, I can pray just as well at home as going to church. I don't have to go to church to pray. No, that's absolutely true. I can pray in my room. And sometimes people complain, I don't like to go to church because I don't like the music they play. It's not my style. The priest preaches too long, or I don't know what he's talking about, or, it's too cold, it's too hot. They don't use incense. They do use incense. They light too many candles. They don't light any candles. All sorts of different things. Say, okay, well, you can set up a little prayer area in your house. Okay, find a little area where you can put up your own image of Jesus, whatever you like to see there. Paint it in whatever colors you like. You can get CDs of the best choral music or Christian rock or whatever type of music you like that's far better than any parish would provide. And you can get CDs from some of the greatest Catholic speakers in the contemporary world who give a homily far better than I or any priest in the parish will give on Sunday. And you can listen to as many verses of the music as you want. If you get tired of it, you can just stop it there. And if the speaker is getting a little boring, you can just turn it off and say, all right, I'm finished with him. And you can have all the candles and incense you want or don't want. And you could say this was a far better prayerful experience for me than I ever get in church on Sunday. And you may be absolutely right. But you know what? There are several things you can't do praying in your room that we can only do praying in church. One of them being with each other, being part of a community, remembering that the name church, from Greek ekklesia, literally means those called out of the world. So if we are called out of the world, obviously that means we are called out to be together, to be bound as a band of brothers. Everybody knows, how many people know that we strengthen each other so much when we bind together with other people. So whether it's people trying to overcome a disability or an addiction or something, we find strength in each other, sharing our own experiences. Sometimes it can be just getting together with like-minded people. You join an ethnic group such as the Sons of Italy or the Ancient Order of Hibernians or anything like that, just to gather with people that share the same background as we do. Or people who join a garden club or a bikers club or something with people who have similar tastes, or the fan clubs of their favorite rock groups, whatever it may be. We find that the experiences of others, as we share them with them, we grow better. And we discover a bond that nothing brings people closer to each other than when we combine our love, our affection, our esteem for each other, whatever it may be at each level, to an outside cause. So when we come together to worship the Lord together and support each other in our desire to worship and serve God, we strengthen each other. And that happens at Mass, that we can't do sitting at home. And secondly, and most importantly, we can't receive the Eucharist at home. We can only do that in church. And that is the foundation of our faith. And I think today, one of the reasons many people excuse themselves from Mass is because they have lost track of the understanding of the Eucharist. That when we come to Mass, as bread and wine are changed into the body and blood of Christ, and we come to receive it in communion, we are physically made one with Christ. We are with him on the cross. So that as Christ was there 2,000 years ago hanging on the cross, you and I, every time the Mass is celebrated, we are united with him. We are there on the cross with him. We suffer with him, we die with him, we're buried with him, and we rise with him. We participate in his paschal mystery over and over again in an unbloody manner, so that we don't have to endure the nails of the cross Sunday after Sunday to free ourselves from our sins, but we come and receive the Eucharist so that we are united with Christ, who died for us 2,000 years ago, but we're with him over and over again. And at every Mass, our venial sins are forgiven, and we grow closer into the Lord. Some of our non-Catholic friends ask us why we as Catholics call the Mass a sacrifice. They say, why do you people call the Mass a sacrifice? Jesus offered the once-for-all sacrifice for sin when he died on the cross. And they're absolutely right. He did. But we're not offering another sacrifice. It's one and the same sacrifice. The night before Jesus died, as he gave us the Eucharist for the first time, he said, "Do this whenever you do it in remembrance of me." And that word remembrance in Greek is anamnesis. Do this whenever you do it to make it perpetually present, forever real to you. So as St. Paul says, every time we eat the flesh of the Lord and drink his blood, we proclaim his death until he comes in glory. So the Mass is the means by which Christ makes forever present his suffering on the cross. And so it's as if he set a power line throughout history that every time we need to be forgiven in the Eucharist, we just plug into it, and Christ's suffering, death, and resurrection are made real for us. And that only happens at Mass. And I'm convinced if people understood that they would realize they're coming to Mass not just to hear a good homily, although it's important, not just to hear good music, although we try our best to make sure that the music is as prayerful as it can be, but that we're receiving the Eucharist. Because when people say, I don't like all of those other things, I don't get anything out of it, the priest homilies are no good, and I don't like the music and everything, what would we do about Masses at 6 o'clock in the morning in some parishes, where the priest gets up and just says the Mass, and there's no homily, there's no music, there's nothing but the ritual of the Mass? Would we say that's useless? No, of course not. The suffering, death, and resurrection of Christ has been made present, and we have participated in that. The homily is important to help us grow. It is my duty as a priest to try to present a homily that will bring people as close as we can into fullness with Christ at that moment, to break open the gospel reading and explain it to them as if to think if Jesus were to come into the world in 2018, how would he have given that message? And the music and everything else to try with all of our senses to bring us into a feeling that we have touched Christ, as indeed we do in the Eucharist. So certainly all the rest of it is extremely important, but the foundation of the Mass is receiving communion, which cannot be done by sitting in our rooms. So yes, the Lord commands that we come to Mass every Sunday so that we will participate in all of that. We can't get that sitting at home. Now, the first thing we have to say is it's Sunday. Sometimes I deal with a lot of the high school kids who go off to Catholic high schools, and kids who used to be here every Sunday when they were in grammar school, all of a sudden, because they have Mass during the week in their school on Wednesday or Thursday, they say, well, I went to Mass on Wednesday, so that's good enough. I don't have to come on Sunday. No, it's the Lord's Day that needs to be made holy. We could go to Mass Monday through Saturday and miss Sunday, and we still committed a mortal sin. Because in effect, we've said, no, Lord, I will not worship you. You are not important to me today. All these other things are important to me. I saw you on Wednesday. That's good enough for this week. Imagine some guy saying that to his fiancée or his girlfriend. They'd be broken up like that. Oh, I saw you Wednesday. Do I really have to see you again today? Of course not. Not happening. Okay? Same thing with the Lord. So, and now the question, the argument we may get from some other people, such as the Seventh-day Adventists, that somehow they came along and claimed, well, the Jewish people, the Sabbath is the seventh day. The seventh day of the week, the day God rested from all its creation. So the Jews rested on Saturday as their holy day. And they'll try to tell us that, like somehow we didn't realize that somehow we forgot that Saturday was the Jewish Sabbath day, and we accidentally started celebrating on Sunday. And they'll even try to tell us, and they claim to be Christians, that we've made a mistake. We're celebrating on Sunday instead of Saturday. We got the days wrong. Well, they've completely missed the point that with the resurrection of Jesus, it's a new creation. As St. Paul says, the old order has passed away, now all is new. We're no longer celebrating the day that God rested, but we're celebrating the day when he rose from the dead and made our salvation available for us. And we come to receive the Eucharist with the understanding of that resurrection, that we're receiving the body and blood of the risen Christ, which makes more sense to celebrate it on the day Christ rose from the dead, not the day that he lay asleep in the tomb. So we're not wrong by celebrating the Lord's Day as Sunday instead. With the resurrection of Christ, the old order has changed, now all is new. So Sundays, we first worship the Lord. And hopefully, now, a lot of times, as I've said, sometimes people today, sadly, give themselves excuses. There are many good people who will come to church most Sundays, but they'll miss here and there. And they say, well, I'm pretty good. I hear people even say to me, we don't get there every Sunday, Father, but we do our best and we're pretty good at it. Well, I like to think of it this way. If you were going on a road through some rocky mountain passes, and let's say there were 9 different or 10 different turns, rights and lefts you had to make, and the speed limit is 15 miles an hour, and if you go beyond that, you're going to go across the edge. And so you go around all of those turns perfectly. You do 9 of them in a row, and the 10th one you go too fast, and you go careening off, and the car goes into the ditch, and you're killed. Would you end up saying, well, come on, I did 9 out of the 10 properly. Don't I get any credit for that? No, we have to do every one of them properly. The Lord didn't say, remember the Lord's Day to make it holy most of the time, or when you feel like it. Every Sunday, to remind ourselves week after week, this is what my life is about. All the things I do on the other 6 days are about today. I worship God, not rushing God in and out to try to see how quickly we can get in and out of Mass to get it over with so we can move on to other things, but say, this is my quality time, if you will. This is my time with the Lord. I worship him. And then after that, I spend time with my family to remember it's about worshiping God and bringing our families to heaven. Are there legitimate reasons when, if we have missed Mass, we have not sinned? Of course. When we're truly sick. Sick in bed, something, not just somebody with a little cough. Sometimes people will go, I've got a cough. Oh, that's a sign of sickness. So if I'm sick, I don't have to go to church. Okay, who wants to go to the beach? Okay, in which case then we're looking for excuses as to why we don't have to go to Mass rather than a legitimate reason for not going. And I always tell people, ask yourself, is what you're using a truly legitimate reason to say, I could not attend Mass, or we're using it as an excuse to keep telling myself, I didn't have to go to Mass? Here we are as men, and most times if it's a man, I ask him, do you like football? And most men will say yes. I said, great. Suppose you had tickets for the Super Bowl. Let's say the Super Bowl was being played here in New York. And you had 50-yard line field level tickets for the Super Bowl. Are those good seats? Oh, you bet your sweet bippy they're good seats. Okay. Would you end up saying, oh, I got a little scratch in my throat. I'm sick. I guess I can't go to the Super Bowl. Not if you like it. Not if you wanted to be there. If you're looking for an excuse to get out of going, then you might call somebody and say, I'm really not feeling well. Why don't you find somebody else? Because you didn't want to go in the first place. But only an emergency would keep us from going to the Super Bowl. And if, God forbid, something happened, somebody was rushed to the hospital. We're saying, hey, I'm supposed to go to the Super Bowl, and my wife just had a heart attack, and we're rushing to the hospital. I hope to the Lord you would be in the hospital with your wife in the emergency room, not at the Super Bowl game. And probably even watching the game on the TV there and saying, all right, it was important, but why did it have to happen right now? Well, same thing with Mass. Are we using this as an excuse, or is it legitimately a reason that we could not attend Mass? Sometimes we get to extremes. I'll get the old people who'll come in and say, Father, I have to go to confession because I didn't go to church for 3 weeks. I said, why? And I can't receive communion. I said, why? Oh, because I didn't go to church. Well, why didn't you go to church? Because I was in the hospital. They're lying in a hospital bed with an IV in their arm. How did they expect to get to church? God is not mean. He's not going to hold us accountable for something we couldn't do. So if we're truly sick in bed and we can't move, and it would be dangerous to us and not good for the other people around us to come and bring that flu or whatever we have into church, we have a legitimate reason. A genuine emergency, someone is rushed to the hospital, okay. Really bad weather. You got a snowstorm going on, or a hurricane or something. Not a little bit of rain, not a couple of flurries, but something that would keep us from doing everything else. And I always ask people, same thing. Would that weather have kept you from going to the Super Bowl, or if you had front row seats to a Broadway show, or tickets to see your favorite pop rock group in concert? If the same excuse would have kept you from seeing them, then you had a same excuse for not going to Mass. But again, asking, were we saying it's too dangerous for me to go, I can't go, or I'm looking for an excuse not to go? And sometimes if we're really honest with ourselves, we say, you know what? Maybe I'm looking for excuses, and I didn't put God first. Or how many times people will say, well, I couldn't go to church, I can't go to church anymore, or at least not for the next 6 weeks because the kids have soccer on Sunday morning. Okay, well then take them Saturday night. We have Saturday night masses. Oh, well, on Saturday night we're busy with this or that. Okay, well, you know what? Something's got to give. And you've got to make God a priority. And if we have all these things in our lives that are taking priority over God, we're doing something wrong. There has to be time in there every Sunday to find the Lord and worship Him. Legitimate excuses sometimes will happen. And sometimes even remind people that you'll see some people who are very good in the parish that, let's say a snowstorm is forecast for Sunday. And they usually go to Sunday morning Mass. So they say, hey, there's going to be snow on Sunday. Let's go Saturday night. So that this way we've worshipped God. All right. Or the reverse. It snows on Saturday night and people who normally would come to Saturday night Mass can't get out because it snowed. Fair enough. Legitimate. But by Sunday morning, the roads are all cleared. The snow has stopped and everything's fine. And you're not snowed in. I know sometimes Yonkers and, the snow removal, it seems the plows come to every other street. And the city of Yonkers' idea of snow removal is springtime. But assuming that they didn't miss your road and your driveway is all cleared out and you couldn't go out Saturday, but Sunday you can. Well, then Sunday we come to Mass. We're not freed from our obligation because it snowed when we normally go. If we're making God a priority, we should want to be at Mass on Sunday. And only a legitimate reason would keep us away. If we're on vacation, we're traveling, and it's impossible to get to Mass. I think of one that in many situations would have been a legitimate reason for my family. We were going on a Perillo tour of Italy, and it began on a Saturday night, the flight. We had to be at the airport by 3 o'clock on Saturday to take our flight overnight into Sunday into Rome. Now, you couldn't go to Mass before 3 o'clock. It doesn't satisfy the obligation for Sunday. And there are no Masses taking place in the airport. There are no Masses on the plane. And by the time you land in Rome and get through customs and get your baggage and get to the airport and get to the hotel, All the masses were over, and they didn't have Sunday evening masses there. Well, there's nothing you could do differently. You couldn't do it otherwise, so therefore you were not at fault. And if we're traveling and it would be a gross inconvenience or impossible for us to make Mass, then of course we are excused. In that situation, of course, since I'm a priest, I brought my Mass kit and I celebrated Mass for my family in the hotel room. So we did that, and we didn't use the excuse to say, oh, we're traveling, we don't have to worry about it. But even I tell people, if you're driving, let's say you're driving from here to Florida, which can be 18 to 24-hour drive, depending on where in Florida you're going, and take a break along the way somewhere and say, hey, it's Sunday morning, let's stop and find a church. Yes, sometimes we have to look for a church, but sometimes people say, well, we couldn't go to church, Father, because we didn't know where the churches were. And I said, okay, well, I guess you didn't eat either. I said, well, of course we ate. Well, how? You didn't know where the restaurants were. Oh, well, we drove around until we found one, or we asked somebody at the desk, can you recommend a good seafood restaurant or a good steakhouse? I said, oh, so you knew how to do it when it came to eating, but you didn't know how to do it when it came to going to Mass, which means eating was important to you, but worshiping God on his day was not. So, legitimate excuses, yes, there are. But truly ask ourselves, is it a legitimate reason why we didn't go to church? Fine. Then we have nothing to worry about and nothing we have to confess. But if we know in our hearts, I really could have tried harder. Maybe I was tired, but I wasn't too tired. Yeah, I'd have gone to the Super Bowl. Okay, then we know we're a sin. And if we've missed Mass on Sunday or a holy day of obligation, such as today, tonight, or tomorrow morning, if you didn't come to the 7:30 at night tonight, find in your own parish what the Mass is tomorrow morning. We're obliged for that. Then we do need to come to confession and receive sacramental reconciliation before receiving communion, because that's serious. We didn't intend it, but we basically said, God, you're not as important to me as all the rest of this stuff is. And of course, we don't mean it, but in effect, that's what happened. So number one way we honor the Lord's Day is by worshiping the Lord faithfully every Sunday. The second, and this is the one that gets lost, that is practically gone in our world, is observing Sunday as a day of rest. A day where we avoid any unnecessary labor. In other words, any work that could be done on another day must be saved for another day. Some work has to be done on Sunday. For example, could you imagine what the world would be like if there were no policemen working on a Sunday? You call up and say, somebody's breaking into my house. Oh, I'm sorry, it's Sunday, we can't work. Come back tomorrow. No, of course not. Help, my husband's having a heart attack. You'll send the ambulance. Oh, I'm sorry, it's Sunday, the ambulance can't work. You got to wait till tomorrow. He'll be dead. So obviously, certain people, work has to be done. Even in our families, there are things we have to do as work. We've got to cook meals, for example, to eat. And I even tell parents, you've got a child who, Sunday night all of a sudden tells you they don't have clean uniform for school tomorrow. Well, now you have to run a load of laundry. But anything we can save to other days should be saved for other days. In fact, even must be saved for other days. Sunday is not a day that we should use for catching up on our work. Whether it's our yard work, our housework, work from the office, whatever it is. But sadly, we end up doing it that way. And it's completely gone in our society. Now, the first thing, in fact, I remember talking about this last Monday with the 5th grade. I said, not doing any work. And they're saying, well, why not? I said, because God said no. God didn't call them 10 suggestions. He says, you will rest on the Lord's day. And they rhymed, now wait a minute. So let's remember something important. Why did God command that the people rest on the Sabbath day? And the answer is literally because they could. They had been slaves in Egypt. When God brought them through the Red Sea to the other side, they're no longer slaves. They are a free people. A slave cannot take a day off. A slave is compelled to work. So the Lord says, you work for 6 days, do all the things of your worldly occupation, of everything you have to do, and one day you rest from those labors. You worship me and relax. Give your heart, mind, body, and soul the rest it needs, and spend time with your family. And that's what it's all about, why we should be resting. When I was young, it wasn't a problem. Many of you, if you're my age or older, will remember when we were kids, no stores were open on Sunday. Only a few things. The bakery to get a couple of buns if you wanted after Mass. The deli if you wanted to get a little antipasto to bring home. But supermarkets, department stores, nothing else was open. You went to Mass and you sat with the family. When I was really little, we all went to my grandmother's house every Sunday for Sunday dinner. And my grandmother made gravy. And it was a time for all of us to be together. But then little by little that started to change, and there was never Little League or any other sports on Sunday. People respected Sunday as our day to be with the family and our day to rest. And I remember when I was a boy, there was a man in our neighborhood who was observed mowing his lawn on Sunday. And the scuttlebutt around the neighborhood was, did you see so-and-so? He was mowing his lawn. Is he a pagan? Has he no respect for God? What is he doing mowing his lawn on a Sunday? Now, 40 some odd years later, we tell people don't mow your lawn on a Sunday. Oh, we're religious fanatics. What happened in 45 years to change us from being that man was a disgraceful, sinful pagan to now being religious fanatics because we say we should not be working on Sunday? And the other thing that most of us are the most guilty of doing on Sunday is unnecessary shopping. Now, there's always going to be a few things you need to have. Obviously, if you're missing something for your meal, you got to go out and get it, or something should be fresh for the meal, so you go right away to pick it up. But you see people doing their heavy weekly grocery shopping on Sundays or going to the malls. Do you realize Sunday has become the biggest shopping day of the week? Even bigger than Saturday, Sunday is the biggest shopping day of the week. What is more identified with Caesar than shopping? Try to get into a mall on Sunday, you just can't do it. And sometimes that even affects our worship. I remember years ago in another parish where I was, there was a boy who, we used to have a Sunday 5:30 Mass in that parish. And the boy who was, I think in our 8th grade, was supposed to serve that Mass and he wasn't there. And I saw him in school the next morning, and I said, well, what happened to you? You missed your Mass. He goes, oh, my mother went out shopping for a sofa, and she didn't get back in time. I said, what was this, an emergency sofa? That they had to buy that sofa only on Sunday. They couldn't wait until Monday to buy the sofa? It's like, and not only was she shopping for something she should not have been shopping for on a Sunday, but she also made her son miss Mass. And so she made him violate his obligation before the Lord. And you see how sometimes one thing can affect another. And sometimes people say to me, you know, Father, that sounds nice for you living in a rectory, but you don't know what life in a family is like. We have to work on Sunday. It's a sad commentary on our society when the church has to command people to rest on Sunday, and people say they're just too busy. I can't rest on Sunday. I have to work on Sunday. Well, if we say I can't rest, I have to work, then what's happened? We've become slaves again. We are serving our labor. It is not serving us. And if we say, I can't rest on Sunday, let that be a big red flag to us to say, you've become a slave. And something has got to change, and something has got to give. But it cannot be our worship of God, and it cannot be spending time with our families. Now that stores are open and Little League games and all that, and people say, some parishes I've been in, I remember one parish, we knew when the local football league was over, because all of a sudden, right around Thanksgiving, all the kids were back. And the parents would blatantly say, well, yeah, now that football is over, now we can bring the kids back to Mass. Well, what did you just tell your kids? You gave them the message that football is more important to God than God. That we have time for football, we have time for God when there's no football, when there's no shopping, when there's no this, when there's no chores, when I'm not too tired. No, we have time for God, number one. We put God first in our lives. We cannot live. We cannot grow in holiness. We cannot grow close to Christ if he is not number one in our hearts. Now, we don't want to be fanatical about it. In Jesus' time, the Pharisees were fanatical about the Lord's Day. They actually even accused him of working because he cured a crippled man on the Lord's Day. And Jesus took them to task for that, saying, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So sometimes there will be things that we have to do on the Lord's Day. But while they and the Puritans, the pilgrims who came over, they were fanatics. You read some of the writings of the Puritans, they dreaded Sunday because you weren't allowed to do anything. Remember, they didn't have TV or radio or anything like that, certainly not video games. And so unless you were going to read a book all day, all you did was sit, maybe play games with each other. And even that, they weren't very good on games because anything that you enjoyed was automatically sinful. So they would just sit and they looked forward to the hour when they had to go out and milk the cows. So we don't want to be overly strict on it. Nor do we're not trying to be nitpickers, but within reason. Sometimes people, I find, are a little bit critical of other people because then they'll get on their high horse and say, oh, that person was working on the Lord's Day. Well, for some people, what's recreational for us may be different for another. Example, somebody who works behind a desk all day. And for him, a nice way to relax is to go outside, get some fresh air, and split wood. And he uses it in his fireplace, and he's not heating the house with it. And for him, he gets out his tensions, his frustrations, gets exercise, great. Somebody who is a construction worker, works with his hands, is on his feet all day. For him, observing the Lord's Day as a day of rest, maybe is a day just to sit in the chair and watch the football game and not feel guilty and let his kids watch it with him, or just go to a park, go to a movie and do it. And of course, if we do that, we're going to go to a movie. Somebody's got to run the movie theater. So, within reason, we don't want to be nitpickers like the Pharisees were in Jesus' time, but we too easily give ourselves these days excuses for why we have to work on Sunday. And we realize, or without realizing it, we've in effect become slaves again to our labor. And so my brothers and sisters, remember, there's no sisters here, my brothers, remember here, the purpose that the Lord gave us the Lord's Day is to remember there's 6 days for our labor, there's 6 days for our chores, there's 6 days for the things of this world, including our shopping, and one day that we break and dedicate to God by worshiping Him faithfully in church, receiving communion worthily, and then spending the day as a day of rest, giving our minds and bodies and souls the rest we need, and spending it with our families. If we do that, I think we can cover a lot of what's lost in the world. We complain about all the different things that have gone wrong, and the world is getting worse, not better. And when we see that happening, sometimes we complain, oh, what's happening? Well, maybe we're the culprits, especially with our commercial desire that we don't know how to spend time with people anymore. All it seems like we know how to do is shop. Case in point. A couple of years ago, they started opening stores on Thanksgiving Day, and many people were furious and saying, why do you have to open the doors on Thanksgiving Day? Wait till Friday. Well, we were hoping that they would do it and quickly discover nobody came out and then decide it was a big colossal failure. But no, it worked, and now it's getting more and more. Stores are opening even on Thanksgiving Day. Why? Because people did go out and shop on Thanksgiving Day. They did not say, no, we'll spend time with our families. And the more we turn away from family and spending time together, the worse it gets. You and I, if we want to be instruments of change, we've got to break all that and start saying, no, I will not shop on Sunday. I will not make Sunday the day I catch up on all of my chores. I will bring my family faithfully to church every Sunday. We will worship the Lord, and we will make it a day of rest, remembering that we are free. We are not enslaved to our work. Our work serves us. We don't serve it. And we will remember what it's all about. We will put God first in our lives and in our families. And when we do that, and Christ is first in our hearts, then and only then will we be in a position to be able to know the peace that only Jesus Christ can give. May Jesus Christ be praised, now and forever. Any questions?